Demonstrations and protests all across the country. Police departments and civil rights organizations are now working together, trying to ease the tension.
And right now, the NAACP is holding a town hall meeting in Stockton. The president of the organization, BIVENS, has stepped out of that meeting to meet with us tonight. He joins us live, as well as Stockton Police Chief Eric Jones. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us tonight.
You're welcome. Good evening.
And Mr. Bivens, let's start with you. What's the focus of your town hall meeting that's happening right now?
Well, the focus is to make sure that people understand their legal rights, also to have them be clear on what the district attorney's office does, what the Stockton PD, San Joaquin Sheriff does, and then have a couple of, one attorney from the California Rural Legal Assistance and a private attorney to address those issues of civil rights and what people need to do so that they don't run into problems with the police, and if they do, how to address them.
Chief Jones, how do you react to that? People showing up to a meeting feeling like they need to have a clear understanding of their rights in that city.
Well,
you know, I think tonight's meeting is a good thing. That's why we have representatives, a lieutenant from the police department as well. It's setting expectations for everybody, and the police department is able to explain why officers do take certain actions in certain circumstances, and also be able to get the feedback from the community on their sentiments. And it's about this open communication, which is so important in all of our communities across the nation.
And Mr. Bivens, you know, we look at police in Ferguson. They have been criticized, of course, for some heavy-handed tactics dealing with the protesters there. Do you kind of have any of the same criticisms here on the local level as well, or not?
Well, the police, Chief Jones has worked diligently to address issues and improve police relations in the community. However, as you know, in all communities, there are some officers that tend to carry themselves in a way that causes a problem. So he and I have been able to work together to address those issues, and when we get complaints from the community, I go directly to him to try to get that resolved. There's always, from time to time, going to be some issues that people want to protest against, and there will be times that the police feel that they have a need to do certain things. So we just try to work together to make sure that that is done properly, and also to work to get diversity on the police department so that there will be officers that look like African Americans, because that is a shortage that we have in our community.
Chief Jones, let's talk about the diversity within your police department. What are the numbers compared to the overall population there?
So currently our department will soon have 8 African American officers on the force. That is not exactly reflective of our community. We recognize that, and as a police department, we want to mirror the very community that we serve. So we are actively recruiting, and it's very important to us to really focus on increasing our African American officers within the police department. We have an ad hoc committee with city council members. We're doing a lot of recruitment at various colleges and strategic locations, but we really also want our local residents, that would be our primary focus on recruitment for officers to work this community. Those from Stockton who become officers and work in Stockton, that's also what we're really working hard on. But we do acknowledge that it's something that needs work on.
Well, we're talking about the so-called militarization of local police forces. Chief Jones, I think if any police department in the country could make an argument for needing military equipment, it might be you right now. You just had a running gun battle with suspects who were armed with AK-47 assault rifles. They hit 14 of your police units. So talk about what equipment you need in order to do your jobs, keep your officers safe, keep people safe.
We do need some equipment that gives us ballistic protection. We do need assault rifles in law enforcement. Those are necessary tools in law enforcement, but when it comes to what we hear about the militarization of police, we need to recognize police officers are not the military. We are public servants. So we must wear our public servant hat. We must be community policing officers And when we need that equipment, that's when we deploy it. We certainly don't want to get in the mode where we're always using that military equipment, but as we've seen by some circumstances in Stockton, across the state, across the nation, there is a need to at least have those tools for law enforcement.
And, you know, we've watched these tensions escalate here with the looting in Ferguson. Mr. Bivens, when protests are warranted, do you worry that that might become an issue, the situation with looting?
Well, you know, there's no reason for the looting, and I understand that the frustration. I'm from Southern California. I was there when the Watts riots broke out and when looting took place, and a lot of that has to do with frustration of the people, or in some cases just plain criminals that take the advantage of the situation. Generally the people that are actively involved in civil disobedience and civil rights demonstrations, they are not the ones that are involved in the looting or the breaking of the windows or the destroying of property. And then from time to time there are people that go around the country that are profiteers that go to where trouble like that is taking place, and they start trouble, which is different from the protests that the local citizens participate in. And we've had that happen here in Stockton as well.
All right, Mr. Bivens, Chief Jones, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
And take care.
Thank you, Chief. Now I'd like to have Bobby Bivens, President of the Stockton NAACP. Let's give a hand to President Bobby Bivens.
Good evening. I'd like to say thank you to all of you for being out here, because this is an important day and an important time. And the NAACP has been visibly working with the issues of police and community for a number of years. It didn't just start this year, last year, or a few years ago on a local and national basis. We here in Stockton have been working with the police. We have worked to try to increase the number of black officers on the force. We have brought suggestions to the chief, of which he has followed some. We encourage them to leave the community and go out where they can be among African Americans and have the opportunity to recruit African American officers. And I have to say that this past summer, the Stockton PD did go to the National Association of Advancement of Colored People's National Convention to recruit or attempt to recruit black officers. Now that's a step. It's not a satisfying step, but it's a step. It's one that's never been made before. A lot of people believe that the officers need to be homegrown. They do need to be homegrown. And the police need to be in the schools visiting with third graders instead of having statisticians collecting numbers at the third grade to build jail cells. Chief Jones has brought about a different culture, but there are officers in the force that have cultural practices that have no place in Stockton. There are still people on the force that believe that people of color are to be stepped on rather than served. As you look back in history, policing came into practice for the purpose of rounding up slaves. The slave masters and plantation owners sent out riders with guns and whips to capture runaway slaves. We are not runaway slaves, and this is not slavery time, and we don't need to be captured, suppressed, or oppressed. The attitude of Chief Jones is very positive. The attitude of some of the higher ranking officers is very positive. And I will go as far as to say that many of the officers on the force are caring, loving people, and everybody wants to go home at night. But because you want to go home at night does not mean that somebody else has to die.
Amen. Come on now. Amen. Yes.
We have had many incidents in Stockton, and the chief and I have talked quickly when some of those incidents have happened. And he has tried to be transparent, and he has sought out solutions, and not just meeting with the NAACP, but with other African Americans throughout the community, including his advisory committee. The reinstitution of the group of ministers and community people that have gone to Kenfield and to Sierra Vista and other parts of the community in an effort to reduce crime, and in fact, in reducing crime, is a plus under his watch. It was here before, it should have never left, but it's back, and the work of these people have made a difference in our community. But it's still not enough, because the community has to step up as well. There's a two-sided street here. You know, at once in my life, I thought I wanted to be a police officer. I took the test, and I knew some of my friends would get busted if I was a cop, and I said, I can't do that. Well, that was my choice. On the other hand, my brother went to work for the LA Sheriff's Department, lasted 4 days, because in jail, somebody wanted him to beat up somebody in jail, and he quit. So there are bad people, and there are good people. As we talk about the task, the NAACP is looking for a national set of guidelines that all police units will use across the nation, and standards, so that what happens in Stockton will happen in Lodi, will happen in LA, will happen in Atlanta, will happen in Tallahassee, all over the country. But the rules have to be changed. When 9/11 happened in America, police changed, policing changed. We went from protect and serve to a terror suppression mode of training and mentality. That has been long gone, but the mentality has lingered in the training manuals of some of the police departments. I have spoken to Chief Jones about this, and he is looking at other ways, and they are modifying the training. But that doesn't mean that today, those folks that oppress people in the community have been washed out. The training needs to be culturally sensitive. The police department's training is doing better, but it needs to be culturally sensitive. They need to understand how black folk operate. They need to understand how black people think. They need to understand that maybe a person that is not speaking clearly is not a threat, or is not somebody that's on drugs, but perhaps they may have a speech impediment. I witnessed a program at the school district last week where 3 Latino kids showed a project, and I listened to them. And I know that if they were not having a science project with robots in their hands, the teachers would be trying to put them into an EMR class, or a class for students that are mentally challenged, because their ability to deliver their language was not clear. But what they were doing was crystal clear and was brilliant. We have that going on in the black community in Stockton. We have brilliant children that may not be able to articulate what it is that they want to say out of fear. Many, many black people are afraid of the police. Many, many Latinos are afraid of the police. So we have to get beyond the fear part of policing and being afraid to deal with the police officers and be able to talk to them. And if you are accosted, you need to collect the information necessary to get them dealt with through the police department. Policy needs to be established as we move into putting cameras on police officers. And the policy should be that after a 90-day or 60-day period of training, if an officer fails to turn on his camera, he should automatically be terminated. That's a policy that needs to be established to make sure that we have good policing practices. In respect of how people in the community are treated, relationships need to be built. Officers need to get out of the car. They need to walk in the neighborhood. They need to talk with people. They need to know who the people are. There needs to be, as the chief said, a trust built between police officers and community people all over the community. And the Gestapo tactics of talking bad to youngsters because they may be wearing their pants down low in a mode that I see white kids doing all over America as I travel now. It's not just black kids, it's not Latinos, it's Asian, it's all the kids. It's a sick, sad way to dress, but nevertheless, that should not determine how you decide to deal with a young person. A young person needs to be talked to, and they need to have an opportunity to explain what it is that they want to say. And if they're too afraid to talk about it at the moment, they need to be given a moment instead of challenged and bullied. So we don't need any police bullying. That has been a part of the practice. That has been a part of what has caused conflict in the community nationwide. We too, on the other side of the fence, don't need to be disrespectful of police officers. I grew up understanding that if a man has a baton in his hand and he has a gun on his hip, you better respect those two things and don't be no fool, because you can't win. There is no way to win when somebody has a weapon on them and you're being disrespectful. So respect is a greater part of it. We have work to do on both sides. The NAACP is here to address the issues, to speak up for people that can't speak for themselves, to negotiate, to mediate, and when necessary, to litigate. So I will stop there and address issues from there on. Thank you very much. One of the additional things that the police officers some officers no longer have is consequential fear. And there has to be an element of consequential fear because we all have consequential fear. And if we do A, then we know that B is going to happen. And unfortunately, some of the bargaining agreements and things that have bureaucracy's hands tied need to be adjusted and addressed, because if there is no consequential fear, then those officers that are rogue officers will continue to do what they have to do, or do what they do, not have to do. The lady asked a question to the chief related to the disabled and people with disabilities. And I think that one of the things that should be looked at, Chief, is the identification of people that have problems rather than people necessarily being drug addicted. And I think that there needs to be some enhanced training for the police and further knowledge to identify those types of behaviors, and then particularly in people of color, when the officer may not understand where they're coming from or how they're coming in the first place. So I would suggest that in response to the question that was asked by the lady related to the disabilities. The question was raised, and the mother raised the question to Mrs. Rivera about her son. There's a bill being introduced to Congress that would mandate, and this is information for the public, that by Congressman Johnson from Georgia, that will require anytime there's a police homicide that a outside independent prosecutor would be brought in. I believe, and the NAACP believes, that when there is a homicide, there should be an independent prosecutor to take pressure off the local prosecutors and also to bring about a feeling of fairness and justice for the community. So we are, and I'm going to be meeting with the new DA. We have a new DA, and I honestly, in my heart, believe we have a new day. But we are going to be talking about the possibility of any time there's a police homicide to bring in an independent investigator, an independent prosecutor to allow the task that needs to be done so that the district attorney's office is not necessarily compromised as the fear was in New York.